of the Lakes and Community Board. Thank you. And we do have members of the public. No mai haramai, welcome to you all, and of course to our staff too. Welcome to our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting today, the 23rd of July 2020. Our meeting is being live streamed, so please make sure that we have our, it's being live streamed, so if you can, just pull your microphone towards you when you're speaking so that everyone can hear clearly what is being discussed at our meeting. That would be very good. Your mobiles off, please, and if you do require to take an urgent meeting, can you just signal that, please, just so that everybody is fully present at our meeting. So thank you very much. I'd ask Councillor Donaldson if he could open our meeting, please, with a karakia. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. E noi tātou. E te atua kaharawa ko koe te tohu rangatira, te tohu mātauranga. Mana kitia mai mātou o pōnanga e tēnei rā. E mahi nei I mātou mahi, o te painga o ngā tangata, o te kaunihera o Rotorua. Akua mai kia tau te rangamari e ki runga I a mātou I ngā wā katoa. Ko ihu karaiti hoki tō mātou ariki. Amen. Almighty God, who is alone is the leader of all mankind and the fountain of all knowledge, send thy blessing upon us, your servants, this day, as we strive to do all things good for the betterment of the people of the Rotorua district. May we be tolerant in ourselves at all times, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. And I did omit to welcome our press. Kia ora, Felix. Nice to see you with us. Apologies, please. I do have an apology for Mr. Berryman Kemp from Te Tātou o Te Aroa, and I understand that Miss Marks may not be in attendance today as well. She was attempting to get here. But could I have a mover and a seconder, please, that we accept? Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you, Mr. Thomas, that we accept those apologies. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Any declarations of interest, please? Ekau, thank you. Urgent items not on the agenda? Thank you. So we will go confirmation of the minutes of the 9th of July 2020. Could I ask that we have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Mr. Councillor Donaldson. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Before I put that motion, are there any changes, amendments to the minutes? No, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion that the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting, minutes 9th of July 2020, be confirmed as a true and correct record. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Staff reports. The recommendation, may I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report. Wastewater Services Long-Term Plan 2018 to 2028 Amendment deliberations be received. Thank you. Councillor Yates, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you. I do have a mover and a seconder. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. Contrary, kia ora, carried. Thank you very much. Kia ora, Stavros. Welcome. And you're going to overview the report. Thank you.
Kia ora, tātou katoa. Kia ora, Madam Chair. I think we've got a PowerPoint presentation. Can I okay. Oh. No, that's fine. It's all right. I can go through that. Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'm very cognizant of the fact that we had a workshop earlier today, and a lot of what's will be presented, and it's what's in the report in front of you are really a summary of the information we have exchanged this morning. However, I wanted to start by reminding elected members through Madam Chair that there is at the moment on the table and a significant conversation arising from the government's three waters reform review. That is not a new subject matter to the Council. As a matter of fact, that reform has been one of the drivers for us revising and considering the options we have to address some of our legacy problems in terms of our three waters in infrastructure and addressing your future challenges. So while officers of this council are open and receptive to discuss with the government and clarify the proposed reforms, and obviously to understand better the implications of this council, especially in terms of asset ownership, the future funding arrangements for any regional entities, the method of control, accountability for performance, and so on. This proposal in front of you today with regards to the maintenance contract for our existing network is designed to give Council a stronger position in considering above reforms and without any undue pressure. Therefore, we think that we'll be in a better position to collaborate or discuss with the government their intentions and without having to enter into an agreement or into a new process from an undue pressure point of view. The proposed contract also in terms of the structure does not constrain the Council's ability to enter into a shared service at the regional level as the government proposes, and the contract makes provisions for renovation into a new entity if that decision has been made in due time. So it's not up for discussion on this today. However, councillors need to be aware of it and cognizant of the implications. So the question is that we follow the consultating process with regards to these contracts, and we did follow the process because we have identified as late as last financial year that triggers the significance policy of the council. And also we wanted to give the community and our elected members an opportunity to consider very carefully the implications into a new consolidated form of contracts. The consultation was undertaken to enable the public to understand better the fact that Council will continue to retain ownership and control of all the assets and stewardship on level of service and strategic direction, while the network maintenance contract will focus attention on to managing the critical part of the network to make sure that Council continues to meet its statutory obligations. And again, as part and parcel of those consultations, we had a number of venues and exchanges, either in the form of the statement or proposal given to our ratepayers. We had public meetings, we had online feedback, and of course, we had a significant interaction with individual or groups, members of the public, to that effect. Can I start back and reiterate a couple of fundamental messages that came through again through the consultation process? It was my perception that the feedback and the consultation process sometimes hinged some position that a lot of negative outcomes have been derived into the infrastructure of the city from the year 2013. I take it that 2013 is used as a political benchmark, which obviously it's in the minds of some people something changed into the landscaping of the city. Some people also raised the issue with me as a GM for infrastructure when I have outlined the condition of our infrastructure along the lines that, well, under US stewardship, your infrastructure has deteriorated. I would take a couple of minutes or maybe 2-3 minutes to walk through some of these implications. I found that a lot of people who genuinely were interested, in the outcomes of this consultation. Some people did not fully understand the information. Some people, as I said earlier, don't want to understand the information. But nevertheless, it's quite important for elected members and the public listening to this to be exposed to, the actions this council has taken over the last few years. An infrastructure strategy was required by the government for the first time in 2015. I came up into the district in 2015, soon after that infrastructure strategy was promulgated. And the intention of an infrastructure strategy is to identify for elected members and the community the issues faced currently in the future for its infrastructure components, to make sure it identifies risks and identifies options to manage those risks. Following the 2015, we started a comprehensive review of the various risks this organization faced in terms of managing its core infrastructure services. A general picture has emerged that in some areas of our infrastructure, there were some significant legacy issues. Those issues varied in degree of urgency and in degree of risk from activity to activity. The infrastructure legacy issues are not really based exclusively on horizontal or surface infrastructure, but relates to other community infrastructure such as the aquatic center, the museum, the Shim Park, the information center, and so on, where we are right now embarking into a process of rectifying some of the deferred renewals or upgrades of these facilities. And obviously, they are in the process of being modernized and being brought to modern standards. In terms of your core infrastructure, early on in 2015, we very quickly identified, that we had to address the systemic and environmental hazardous operation of the landfill, which was operated in an open landfill on an open phase basis, which accrued a significant environmental and health and safety liability for the community. We have addressed that by 2016 through the waste management strategy, where we embarked into a contract to cap and seal the landfill, capture the gas, and eliminate 90% of our environmental emissions. We've done that through a partnering arrangement with an external contractor who provided all the capital for capping and sealing, and also we avoided to inject additional at least $10 million of capital for creation of additional cells for the landfill. Then the waste collection system was based on paper bags and generally a process that was quite antiquated. The paper bag system was providing poor service to the community, but most importantly, a significant health and safety hazard to the collectors. Around about the same time in 2016, we embarked into the procurement process and we converted the waste management system into a wheelie bin system where households have been given an opportunity to recycle at their venues. We've seen a significant improvements in terms of the presentation, environmental degradation, and the recovery of materials to the process, and obviously also a vastly improved system for health and safety for the workers, because the collection system is automated to mechanical means, and we no longer have workers engaged in the process. Again, the same example as the landfill. To embark into service change, a contractor came into the procurement process. They invested about $5 million into the wheelie bins, and they have invested also close to about $8 to $9 million for the procurement equipment, vehicles, and so on to do the work. Otherwise, council will have to continue to invest in that amount of work. Also, 2015 infrastructure strategy identified that our roading resiliency program was substandard. And as a result of that, in 2016, 2017, 2018, we suffered significant damage to some of our critical roading infrastructure. Bridges were being undermined, foundations were endangered, roads were in a position of being swept away. And since 2016, we have embarked into a road resiliency building program that makes sure that we are addressing the critical components of our network. And that network obviously continues to improve. We haven't addressed all the issues yet, but we'll continue to work on the basis of our 2018-2048 infrastructure strategy. Then we had systematically moved into addressing the Rotorua Eastern Arterial designation, which has been into an abeyance for about 60 years, since the early 1960s, where NZTA eventually accepted that by 2016 they were not in a position to give effect to that designation. The reason for that, the land that was required to give effect to the designation was not all in ownership, and there was no way for them to be able to acquire the land because of the settlement agreements they were. Instead, we have agreed with partners in the ZTA to improve the Eastern, Central, and Western corridor, and now we do have about $80 million worth of investment into those corridors and continue to progress with additional investment coming in the near future. Again, the infrastructure strategies of 15 and 18 identified that although there has been consistent expressions of intention to modernize our energy-consuming assets, such as streetlights, 5,500 streetlights, we're still operating significantly older systems consuming significant amounts of energy unnecessarily. We have embarked in the procurement process and to secure 85% subsidy from NZTA to convert our LED lights, which are now in the process of being converted to LED, and at the lowest possible cost to the ratepayers, and also to reduce our energy consumption by at least 50%. Again, Rotorua being an active destination for active motor transport, mountain biking, and active recreation, our urban cycling network was almost not existent. And together with our partners and NZTA and our contractors, we embarked and built over the last 3 years about 30 kilometers of sheer paths, especially for destinations towards schools. What we witness at the moment is that the number of kids riding, walking to schools after 3 years is increasing by at least 70 to 80% in some areas. And of course, we have calculated that the avoidance of traveling time because of that saves our environment at least 6,000 vehicle movements a day. And again, that has been done in conjunction with partners in the private sector and contractors, and so significant contracts with that industry. Our drinking water standards, especially following the Havelock North situation, were found to be wanted. We did not have sustainable and reliable treatment of all our 10 water sources. We had chlorination in the system, but we did not have UV treatments. And obviously, one of the lessons we have learned from recent events, both in New Zealand and overseas, is that UV treatment is extremely effective to that effect. So the 2015 infrastructure strategy set up as a goal to gradually make sure that all our sources of water are UV treated, and last year was the first year that's been achieved, and all our sources are UV treated. And again, that's a complex system and process to achieve that, and of course we've done that together with our partners in the private sector. Again, another example of what the infrastructure strategy identified is that the gradual reticulation of wastewater systems around Lakes community, and as you know, we are part and party of the Rotorua Lakes Community Water Quality Strategy Group. The Rotoiti-Rotoma scheme has a long history of litigation and community tension, and obviously by 2013, an environment court decided against the council's application for the resource consents, and the judge in that court decision clearly articulated that we had to improve the way we manage our relationships with Manawhenua. Following from that, a gradual agreement has been reached by the steering group, and the reticulation scheme in Rotoiti-Rotoma has gained a resource consent. It is a challenging project, but significantly is more challenging because the relationship we have inherited between the community and the council has been significantly affected by the previous experience in the environment court. But nevertheless, we are now at 75% completion, and we're working with the community to complete the Rotoiti scheme. So I think when you look into all these infrastructure elements and the gradual improvements that have taken place between 2015 and now, for the last 4 or 5 years, you can see a significant movement in the direction of addressing the challenges and the risks we know now and how we're going to position ourselves to address it better in the future. Consistent with that approach, we looked into our wastewater network, like its condition, its operation, and its future capacity to address growth. What we see in front of us here in our wastewater system is that it's a network that comprising somewhere in the region of 520 kilometers of pipes, 87 pump stations, 2 treatment plants, rising mains, 1,500 grande pumps, and so on. The asset management plan identified very clearly from 2015 that the network has been consumed halfway through its life. In other words, its value has been consumed by 50% over the last years, and especially historically, you identified that the investment in the renewals has never been more than 0.5%. And that's inconsistent with the depreciated value of the network, because if you do put it together, especially with the assumed life expectancy of the asset of an average of 75 years, we should really be investing at least 1.5% of the value of the asset into the network. So the gap in terms of the current condition of the network and the legacy approach identifies that with some almost $200 million of unrenewed portion of the asset, that means you have a legacy going back 30 to 35 years that needs to be rectified. The reality is that a similar approach, then a similar condition applies to all other horizontal networks, the 3 water networks. And the reality is that we cannot afford to do in one go. We cannot rectify 30, 35 years of underinvestment over in a short period of time, and therefore, from a professional perspective and the risk mitigation perspective, we arrived at a management of the critical components of the network as a first stage, with the option later on expanding that. Once you stabilize the network, then we move into an approach where we gradually rectify what we have inherited from the past. Now, the critical components of the network really are simple. It's that are the treatment plants, the pump stations, the rising mains, the interceptors, and the collectors. And the reason for that, we call them critical mains, is that critical components is the fact that failure of any of these critical components will and can affect a significant portion of our community, both in terms of service level, in terms of health and safety, and in terms of environmental degradation. And therefore, our approach for the next few years will be to stabilize that critical part of the network, and we sought questions as to which is the best way to achieve that. In parallel with wastewater, we're also addressing at the moment the water supplies for future growth, and we are undertaking a master plan to be received by you during the LTP in the next year. And also we are undertaking a comprehensive stormwater master plan, because we know that with the climate change, that could be a significant challenge that needs to be addressed. And again, you can see that a lot of these, both water supplies and stormwater issues, we are still leveraging and taking advantage of what we have inherited from earlier years in the 50s and 60s. But really, in the last 30 or 40 years, not a significant effort has been made to upgrade these, those areas, and we need to really look into the next future for the next 50 years at least. So why we propose to go to a performance-specified maintenance and operations contract? It's part and parcel of asking the question as to how to make sure we address effectively the management of our critical part of the network in a way that is minimizing the risk to the council. We recognize the fact that we do have a changing regulatory landscape, and what you see at the moment with the 3 waters reform is exactly what we have anticipated. The government wants to ensure that local authorities can no longer flout regulations and comply with higher standards of treatment. However, technology and the technology to manage these assets is changing all the time. There is a specialization in roles and requires special qualifications to make sure you have a consistent management approach. There is a demand to qualify verification processes for meeting resource concerns. And obviously, there's a constant demand for our young and emerging engineering sector and technical sector to be working in a place where they can see professional career pathways and expectations in front of them. And obviously, working in smaller organizations, those opportunities are quite limited. So the risk management approach for a wastewater management strategy was based on our 2018 infrastructure strategy. It was addressing and signifying to the Council, and to the credit of this Council in 2018, you have accepted that the renewal investment made onto wastewater assets in years past was significantly below the required level. And for 2018 and for the next 30 years infrastructure strategy, you have identified and you have agreed that it will be funded to appropriate level of depreciated deterioration at 1.5% of the value of the assets. And that's embedded into your infrastructure strategy at the moment. The procurement strategy was centered around the objective to secure a consolidated performance and risk minimization to the Council, because at the moment the way we deliver services is what we call a salami slices approach. We have lots of little contracts, but no individual contract has the overall responsibility for the performance, integrity, and condition of the network. And obviously, we believe that the proposal of how to manage the network has to be able to address our future stability and reliability of the wastewater services at the lowest possible risk to the Council. Not at zero risk, but at the lowest possible risk. So we went for a consultation process after a significant process. Some people ask, why rush? Why are you in a rush to get into that? Well, the point is that we have identified these risks back in 2016. We started a procurement process in August 2017. In October 2017, we reported to the Council of the workshop that we're going through this procurement process with these specific intentions, and those were embedded into the LTP for 2018-2028. In November 2018, we reported to the Council after the procurement process that a preferred supplier was identified. In November 19, we again had another workshop with the Council, which was open, and identified the fact that as we progress through the annual plan for 1920, we will ask the community about their views for long-term contracts. Also, post-elections in October 19, we had an induction workshop with all the new elected members where the same process was being explained to our elected members, and we explained that we would embed this proposal into 1920 annual plan for that to be consulted, and once consulted, then we'll make a decision. In March 2020, we had another workshop before the draft annual plan for 2021, and the elected members have agreed that we'll go for a special consultation process for this proposal. In between 2017 and 2020, at least in 10 occasions, the Operations and Maintenance Committee received reports about this procurement process. So when people ask, is that the process of making decision was rushed, I would argue that the record will indicate something contrary to that. Some of the feedback we had was about the loss of control by Rotorua Lakes Council, and the reality, and as you saw this morning here with my infrastructure staff, Council intends to retain, nurture, and grow our infrastructure engineering management capacity, and will continue to have that. So the control remains with the Council in a meaningful way. The transfer of risk, obviously, we're transferring operational and asset maintenance risk to the contractor, but we're always going to be the consent holders, and we transfer the compliance with these consent conditions onto the contractor, as we expect them to take a proactive risk management approach in that respect. Cost of the options, people ask the question, how about if we do it everything ourselves? Why should it cost us what the contract is proposing to cost? But I think the reality is that we have constructed a baseline that indicates, as a minimum, our cost will be about $700,000 a year less than what the price offered from the contract is. However, the point is that this is a baseline with an open ceiling, an open-ended ceiling. And bearing in mind that we do have half of our asset network pass through its halfway life, our cost liability could extend in an extreme up to $200 million. So it's very easy for components of the network to break down, and that $700,000, which we see as a premium to achieve cost certainty, can be maintained. Again, the questions through the feedback process is that, will you have an in-house capability to manage the contract and be a smart buyer? My assurance to you, and I think it's always going to be something that is an absolutely essential capability of the Council who operates infrastructure services, that it needs to have an absolute ability to manage strategic services and control contracts. And as I said earlier, if you go back to the other actions that are taken from 2015, ranging from the landfill, the rubbish collection, the UV treatment, the installation of routing networks, the resiliency actions, all these are done through contracts. And these contracts are managed through our infrastructure group. So they're not operating in a vacuum. They're operating and managed by people who already have got the expertise and the knowledge to manage these contracts. Again, this is some issue that relates to the perennial question as to what are the costs of the activity and why do we outsource? The term outsourcing is quite a term that's used in a wrongful way. The pie on one side indicates what the activity costs and clearly says that in order for us to deliver wastewater services, we incur costs in energy, or 13% of the cost, buying materials, labor, plant and equipment, especially services, get rid of our biosolids, and a small residual capability to pay for our internal rates, insurance components, and engineering monitoring the services. At the moment, the only part that we control is the RLC 6%, and out of the total labor component, about 1/3 of that, which is about 10 staff at the treatment plant. In real terms, out of the total cost to manage the service, only somewhere in the region about 13% are managed internally. All the other 87% are managed by a variety of different contracts and supply services and agreements. So consolidation of a contract, it makes sense because none of these existing contracts and current contracts has ultimate responsibility and accountability or have any skin in the game to make sure that it meets performance expectations arising from statutory obligations. And we did a risk profile assessment, which basically indicated 3 potential models. One is the current model, which is the salami slice. 2, the blue structure there indicates what if we employed everything ourselves? What we brought, we employed 30 or 40 people and had to dig trenches and replace pipes and repair pumps and so on. Again, all the risk in terms of biosolids, energy, plant and equipment, special services, materials and labor will reside with this council here too. We do not produce materials. We do not produce concrete. We don't produce pumps. We do not produce specialist equipment. We do not produce electricity. We cannot manage biosolids. We have to buy these services anyway. And I remind elected members too, I would like to remind you that about 3 weeks ago when your InfraCo CCO came to you for an O&M report, it said to you very clearly that 50% of its own services are outsourced. It's reported to you that other than the labor, they are now outsourcing the leasing and management of their plant and equipment. Certainly, InfraCo doesn't produce pipes in the utility services. They don't produce pipes. They have to buy that material from outside. So when people think that we should do everything in-house, the maximum ability you have to do in-house is no more than 30%. Everything else has to be purchased from outside. But you have to ask the question, where does the risk lie? And the risk will always lie with the council. And therefore, we found that a performance-specified operational and maintenance contract with a fixed price, transferring the maximum risk liability to the contractor to meet statutory and operational requirements, either the green bar charts, and give you the lowest risk profile that you can achieve. And again, this highlights that the transfer of significant portion of the risk to the contractor who have a special access to specialist expertise for technology solutions and life extension, And obviously, you make sure that the contractor focuses on the critical parts of the network, stabilize their condition, and mitigates any escalation of risks going on in the future. Again, because the contract is structured in a way that incentivizes the contractor to achieve and protect against failures, the systems and processes to risk management for them will be a matter of financial criticality. And obviously, having a fixed level of costs, that gives us improved certainty going forward in the future for long-term planning. And if the councillors in the future want to accelerate capturing back the consumed part of the network, well, it's your decision. You can make that decision in due course. How are we going to manage the network? As I said, we will focus attention on the critical parts, treatment plants, pump stations, rising mains, pressure mains, collector pipes, and those will be managed on the basis of consequences and risks. We can also make sure that the condition of that critical part of the network now with the appropriate renewal investment, which is significantly better than it was over the last 30 or so years, we'll be able in 10 years' time to see a material improvement to the condition of the assets, and then you can start building from there on. Again, you do have the option, if you want, if you so wish, to invest to accelerate that renewal, but it's exclusively your decision and it's not the contractor's decision. It's our decision to make. In arriving at a decision we made to get to a recommendation to you, obviously we did not work entirely on our own. We had to use specialist expertise from external sources. We used procurement specialists, we used legal advice. We had a financial due diligence done by Deloitte. We use technical support from prominent McDonald's, specialist engineering consultants, and obviously our infrastructure team worked together with everyone to make sure we look after the interests of the council in the currency and the future. Again, TRILITY consortium is not just TRILITY one company. It's a consortium comprising TRILITY Group Australia. It comprises Fulton Hogan and Stantec, which again is another specialist company in the country with a long experience in terms of technical solutions to water issues. The question has been asked during the consultation process as to what kind of contractual firewalls are there to make sure that we have a protection against this company. TRILITY Group Australia will set up a TRILITY New Zealand company, and TRILITY New Zealand company will carry out all the operations here in New Zealand. The parent company in TRILITY Group, the Australian company, would provide a $15 million performance guarantee for the TRILITY New Zealand company. There is a performance bond of $2 million to cover council for a breach of TRILITY New Zealand's failure to undertake their contractual requirements. And obviously, council also made provisions in the contract to have step in right. If we don't want, if for any reason the relationship sours in a way that they want to step in, we have a right contractually to engage directly with Fulton Hogan and Stantec to do different works, but excluding TRILITY. Local issues, we have been very particular in that. We wanted to make sure that employment of local workforce is paramount by the consortium. You heard this morning in the workshop that Fulton Hogan and TRILITY intend to use predominantly local people. They have a local presence. They have a local chain of supply, local relationships. Most of their staff live here, and Fulton Hogan's 90% of their workforce of 50 or 55 people are actually Rotorua ratepayers. And they intend to employ between them another 30 or local people to finish his contract. Our wastewater treatment plant has reached an agreement with their unions to transfer into the new consortium. And you heard from the union this morning, they are comfortable with the conditions and the opportunities given to them. You heard the TRILITY's manager expressing their attention and their ethos towards transferring skills to locals and the apprenticeships and scholarships they propose, they intend to put in place. You heard from the MOU between the TRILITY Consortium and the Tiaroa Collective, and the way that the two parties will work together to both transfer skills and ensure kaitiaki relationships. And of course, our Rotorua laboratory, our council laboratory, will continue to provide monitoring and testing services for that, for the consortium. Again, as I said, Tiaroa is involved into that, and the staff and unions have been involved into that, and they all express their confidence and satisfaction that the proposal meets all their requirements, and look forward to continue to work with the consortium to enhance both the skills of the staff and also the skills and the involvement of Tiaroa in a meaningful way in terms of kaitiaki and also skill transfer opportunities. So what are the Council's remaining and unchanging roles and responsibilities? Council will continue to be the asset owner and control. Council will lead strategic planning and growth through its spatial plan and specifying the level of service to be achieved. Council will dictate and define the funding and revenue policy for the services, how the services will be paid for, through targeted rates or general rates or fees and charges. It is Council's decision. Council will be responsible to monitor the performance as a consent holder, and will have a primary accountability in terms of the community, in the eyes of the community, to give effect to the commitments it made through resource consent and its relevant conditions. And how are we going to manage that contracts? Again, I had with me this morning a good representative group of my engineering department that will always be here, and they will be responsible to manage the contracts. They will monitor and certify the works in terms of asset standard and quality. They will ensure that they report to Council on a regular basis about the performance of the contracts, and the infrastructure group will ensure that we have a current and ongoing capability to be a smart buyer on behalf of the community. And I think that is something that councillors needs to be certain about. And I think that's it. And Madam Chair, I think that's a succinct repetition of this morning presentation, but I leave the report on the table as it is, and happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stavros. Stavros, is that going up on the website? That one is.
Correct.
Oh, thank you. So the presentation this morning, that's going up.
Yep.
And this one as well.
Correct.
Thank you very much. So that gives everyone watching and other community citizens who might be interested, gives them an opportunity to have a good look as well. So we are going to take some questions now. So please, all your questions. Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Stavros, and for this morning's workshop as well. My question is from the feedback from the workshops that we had when we went through the special consultative procedure. There seemed to be a lack of any awareness that this process had been going on since August 2017. And that I found that quite surprising, because it had been well reported. What do you think it was that pressed the button of those that came and showed genuine concern?
Your Worship, I will address that. I will respond to that at two levels. One is just a matter of fact. As I said, the reporting against this process has been consistent to elected members and through public open meetings through O&M for 3 years now.
Yeah.
So there's no excuse for people to say that, well, you cannot access that information. Two, I think there is and also remember that the fact is that in 2019-20, last annual plan, we actually again consulted about the proposal to have a long-term contract. And after that feedback, we came back and you have decided, look, we have the feedback, but we will follow some more due diligence. We wait for a new elected member council to come through, and then we make a decision, and we go for a special consultative process. So at least for the last 2 years, that information has been out in the public domain. My personal impression is that's totally subjective. from the participating in public meetings. There are a number of groups of people who come there. Some of people are genuinely interested about what's happening to our current infrastructure, how we're protecting it in the future. There are some people who certainly did not understand the information about what the Council has been addressing in the last 4 or 5 years, and they wanted more information. There are some people who genuinely don't want to know about it, not interested about the information. They made up their minds that there is a wholesale asset sale, and I've had inquiries about us selling the treatment plant, and that is really out of nowhere. And there are obviously some people that seem to be sometimes got selective memory, where they forget that in the past there have been a gradual degradation of the infrastructure, and for some reason there is no appropriate connection between an asset that's been gradually degrading and the need to actually put something into place to manage it for the future. But it's a subjective observation. The facts are the facts.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Through you, Stavros, congratulations on a highly professional and well-orchestrated presentation this morning. It's comprehensive and covered the ground, illustrating quite clearly your advice to Council with regard to making an amendment to the long-term plan 2018-2028. So this is a very, very serious strategic decision for Council to make. And you've helped us in that regard. So please thank you, guests. And also, I admired your use of PowerPoint, that I could be so lucky. Anyway, you've advised us right at the outset. The first point you made was that we should not consider the government's Three Waters reform program as we make amendments to our long-term plan. And I would like to suggest, and I'll end with a question, that there are good reasons for us to take stock of the government's Three Waters reform program. It's supported by all of the political parties. I attended a workshop on Monday and for 4 hours got an equally sophisticated presentation of the Three Waters challenges across the country, the importance of setting up a regulation authority to establish and develop national standards, and the importance of setting up to 5 independent and publicly owned entities.
There's a question in there, is there?
There is, and I'm coming to it. Because this presentation ended with information that each council, including us, is being invited to sign an MOU with the Department, the DIA, by the end of August to submit bids, project bids, a la shovel-ready projects, by the end of this August. So there is reason to consider this proposal. And it's to be underway by June 2021, paid for from 3 tranches, not just the first tranche.
What is the question, Councillor McPherson?
So the question is this, that we've got this major government initiative rolling, and it's going to happen. Why would we not want to pause now to reconcile these 2 agendas? On one hand, your proposal to make these adjustments to the long-term plan, but secondly, in a context of a government program which is going to have 3 massive tranches of money, why would we want to preclude ourselves? In other words, my question is, would we not want to plan a reconciliation of those 2 agendas and therefore pause at this stage so we can take stock of that second agenda? Thank you.
And I'm sure your response will be equally brief. Thank you.
With regard,
Thank you.
Point
of order?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my presentation was quite clear. We do not see the maintenance contract as a proposal at the moment to be in any way in conflict, with the government's, Three Waters reform. We intend to collaborate with the government and explore these opportunities. But if you look into the Department of Internal Affairs advice, FAQs will tell you quite clearly we advise the councils not to change anything in their LTP on what they do at this point in time until these issues have been crystallized. And that's my remains my recommendation. I see absolutely nothing in this recommendation that will be in conflict with entering into a maintenance contract.
My second question.
Thank you. Second question, yes.
My second question. One of the conditions of the agreement that that the government is offering is that they would...
Thank you. I'm not allowing that question.
I can rephrase the question.
This is, if it's around the three waters, I'm not accepting your question.
That's
so thank
bizarre.
you. We will move on. Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, Severus, thank you again for this morning. Although there was talk around it perhaps being a little bit late, I think we've had ample time and opportunity with the information that we've been provided with. My question, however, which I should have asked this morning, was I do want confidence that with this partnership, our environment will be taken into consideration. I do require that around the geothermal nature. I just wished I'd asked that question earlier, so can you provide a little bit more confidence for me around that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Yates. I think there are two angles to that. One is that protection of the environment, is not really sort of something that is optional for us. Our activities in managing wastewater are governed by very solid statutory obligations embedded into our resource consent conditions. So that's not optional. We have to meet them. Second element, of course, you heard the TRILITY manager here and the extensive work they already have done with Rotorua community to work together in AKTI roles. And one of the reasons how we stressed that at the upfront in 2017, when we started the process, we said that we simply cannot continue to provide infrastructure services on the basis that are in isolation from the feelings and cultural values of our iwi community. And we want anybody who aspires to be a partner to the Council to deliver services to be fully aware or embrace these aspirations we have. And as you heard from Tataru White, that has been an early game changer for them in terms of endorsing this shortlisted consortia.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And look, I know I alluded to this in the question I asked this morning, but since we're now being streamed in a public session, could I just ask if you could just reiterate, because you did it much better than I have when people have asked me the question, just to reassure people around the difference between the costs with our sort of guaranteed costs underneath the proposal before us, and the base costs if we kept it in-house. I know it's been a question that's come up with a lot of people, not quite understanding the two different criteria that are used for establishing those prices as well. So just wonder if you could answer that again, please. I'm sorry to be re-asking it.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Look, at the end of the day, what we have structured a model which is embedded in our annual plan in our LTP, with relevant amendments to these costs input into wastewater services, is that on the basis of our historical maintenance and operation costs, and on the basis of the identified renewal profile, and again, it's 1.5% of the value of the assets, and on the basis of energy consumptions, and our understanding of the network, we have established what we call a baseline. But that baseline is a baseline. It's a best estimate at this point in time, and as I said, our wastewater network is halfway through its life. In terms of value, it's got an unrenewed portion of close to $200 million. So the difference between our baseline costs and the fixed price offered by this contract is about $700,000 a year. But $700,000 a year could be consumed by simply blowing up of a pump station. One of the 87 pump stations, maybe 10 grand the pumps can go up, interceptor can collapse, and very easily you can accumulate $1 or $2 million additional repair costs than you have anticipated. All that risk remains with us at the moment. The proposed contract puts a ceiling to those costs, and the risk is transferred to the contractor for that fixed price. And that's what an essential nature of the difference between a baseline and a fixed price maintenance contract. Okay.
Thank you.
Your Worship.
Just a question that I think we learnt in COVID, and we're now in the post-COVID environment, and facing these unprecedented risks in the future of storms, climate change and resilience. In the contract, how did you build maintenance of the network to forestall the heavy hits that we're going to face, and we know that we are, as well as the just-in-time replacement, such as the Ngongataha floods?
Climate change has got two fundamental effects onto our wastewater services. One is that the wastewater system should be isolated from stormwater.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it is not, for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons is because we have let the networks, not just in Rotorua, but across the country, deteriorate to a level where there are lots of cracks and joint dislocation and brittleness on the pipe networks. And a lot of stormwater infiltrates through joints into the pipes or through dysfunctional gully traps and private properties cross connections. So climate change will see us experiencing higher intensity, more frequent rainfalls, which means increased stormwater. One of the advantages of this contract is that it requires a contractor to receive sewage, even though sometimes in wet weather might be 3 or 4 times higher than the dry weather, treat it and meet resource consent requirements. They have an operational and financial incentive to be proactively identifying areas of high inflow and infiltration, and through a renewal and maintenance program to minimize it, because it's not in their financial interest to continue to tread water, as the proverbial says. They should not be treating stormwater, they should be treating wastewater. So that is their responsibility. At the moment, there is responsibility in terms of energy consumption, pumping, treatment, chemicals rests with us. For their fixed price, they will have an incentive to say, well, treating stormwater, which we shouldn't be treating, is going to cost us more. Then proactively they will downstream the effects and address them.
Thank you. Stavros, I do have a question, and it's around local jobs, and it came up often during the submissions, and I would just like to, because we've got people live streaming, and we're live streaming, just to ask you again around that, so that local people do get the local jobs. Thank you.
Madam Chair, it was and continues to be a significant requirement of this negotiations into the procurement process. The people who perform their works, will be predominantly local. You heard from Fulton Hogan that 90% of their staff are here, Rotorua residents. You saw a couple of TRILITY staff who are already Rotorua residents, and of course, our staff will be transferred to Rotorua residents. Chain of supplies are local, and we continue to make sure that preference and dominance will be on local skills acquisition and employment.
Yes, certainly, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. I have a question about the contract itself. The contract's for 156 million over 10 years. That's 15.6 million per year. Now, Trility's profits from their own website, their profit margin varies between 19 to 19.9% over the last 5 years. Does that not mean that between 2.5 million to 3.1 million will have to be taken from targeted rates and leave Rotorua's economy every year to pay for that profit?
No. I think and I don't want to go into debate about what the corporate group of TRILITY group, calculates the basis of their margins. But I am totally aware that their margins targeted for this contract are well below that, in range between the 7% and 8% of their revenue. Now, Remember, they do carry the risk of not having any margins. I think we should not always assume that they will make margins and make profits. And actually, I would be extremely worried if I work with a contractor that does not make margins. But however, can I also say, Councillor McPherson, very clearly to you, is that what do you think the 90% of the services we buy at the moment have as margins? Do you think when we buy concrete and pipes and cement and pumps, and when we buy them, all these people offer them to us at no margins, at no profit, at cost?
Am I free to answer?
No, that's a rhetorical question. Thank you. Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just really wanted to ask if Stavros could repeat for the general public's consumption. So this morning we had the expertise from lawyers, procurement specialists, engineers and TRILITY give a presentation, and I thought that it was an excellent presentation, and thought that it would have been really fruitful to have had that presentation pre this meeting, with allowing more time for deliberation, consultation, and just thinking about that, because for me this morning has now raised a whole lot of other questions. And so the rationale for the contractors to shift the risk from the council to TRILITY, particularly in the situation of catastrophic or shock events, and that's one of the major rationales that we used for the transfer of risk. But my questions this morning were around the risk for council for the unknown costs, where there may be unknowns that we haven't foreseen. We've got the COVID situation, we've got other unknown factors which were raised as potential risks, such as the unknown discharge point for the wastewater treatment plant. I wondered if you would care to comment on the unknown costs or risks that we are trying to mitigate or alleviate.
I think there are a number of questions, and I would try to sort of, go through separately from you, Councillor Kaipong. I think the issue of a catastrophic failure, and I think, can I distinguish a sudden and unexpected failure of the main pipeline, the interceptor, for example. That's what I call shock event. Shock is something that happens that you don't expect it, you shouldn't expect it to happen. That risk rests entirely with the contractor at the moment. They have spent 2 years doing due diligence, and as you heard of them, they've done a significant investigation of the network, and therefore the contract expects them to carry that cost of repair and to carry the cost of any remedial works, or to pay for any prosecution costs. That's distinct from a catastrophic failure along the lines of a seismic or caldera effect. We have insurance, and in part of the $15.6 million Councillor McPherson identified is about $250,000 we pay for what we call a natural event catastrophe. And they've got insurance with limits and so on. That's insurance we have for our network. The third element, of course, it's with regards to unforeseen. Every contract, whether it's 3910 or 3917 or whatever it is, it requires a contractor to the principal to let the contractor know what are the ground conditions or the known conditions, and the contractor is required to investigate and assess these conditions and risks before they put a price. There is an element inside any contract which says prices for unforeseen conditions. But unforeseen conditions are defined as all those conditions that a reasonable, professional, experienced contractor have to have reviewed the risks that the principal provided them, and after their due diligence could not have expected to foresee them. And I think that bar is very, very high to, for them to jump, to say that, look, we went to work on Devon Street and we found some geothermal activity there, and therefore we need to do some additional work. That is not going to wash down very, very well at all. Now, the point of this charge, as you said earlier, is that it's got totally relevant with that. At the moment, they are being given a contract or proposed to have a contract that will operate the treatment plant at the current point of discharge in the forest. If the resource consent requires us to change the point of discharge, that will be a part and parcel of the cost of the construction or upgraded treatment plant, and that will be, that's part and parcel of the new process, But right now, they are contracted to operate the treatment plant under the current resource consents into the forests, and will operate that to meet the resource consents as they are at the moment.
I'll certainly have you.
One further question, just in relation to this morning, which was, because we don't have consideration yet, and I know we've been asked to discount the government's three-water proposal, but should we want to opt in and then later opt out of that, if we choose to opt in and we find that that is a really good solution, and for some reason we need to opt out of the TRILITY contract, are there costs or consequences as a result of that? If you could repeat perhaps some of the advice that we were discussing this morning around novation or termination of contract and the potential costs around that.
Firstly, I find it extremely difficult that we will decide to opt out of a maintenance contract simply because the government is thinking about forming a new regional entity that will be owning the assets. The question has to be asked, how long this entity will take to be formed, to be consolidated, to be structured, and identify ways of delivering services. I'll put that part aside. I find it extremely difficult to see that's happening. Let's say tomorrow or in 2 years' time there was a new entity and they will be managing the assets on our behalf because we have agreed to transfer the assets to them. And we asked TRILITY to say, well, okay, your contract will be novated to that entity. There is no contractual penalty for that. It's just other than the cost of structuring a paperwork or novation, there is no other additional penalty. Now, any contract, of course, at the end of the day, if it's terminated because one party is at fault, the other party has an expectation, they should have an expectation, there will be some compensations for that. If TRILITY failed in performing their contractual expectations, we have step-in rights and we have the ability to call the parent company warranty of $15 million or the $10 million performance bond to our favor. But if we did something that's totally unethical and totally in breach of our contractual obligations, I think TRILITY will have a recourse to say, if you terminated my contract 3 years before my end of the term, then I had the right to expect X number of margins and profits, and obviously there has to be some litigation around that. But at the moment, we don't know what it's going to be,
Thank you. I don't intend to have any discussion, and you made it very clear that in terms of the three waters, I mean, it was only announced in the last, few weeks by the government. So, and we do intend to be involved at some stage, but if you would like to clear this up once and for all, thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair. Look, I think the concern here is that is this a either or situation? Should we put the current proposal on hold while we explore what the government is actually putting on the table as sort of the notion? Is that a viable option for us to consider? I think in looking at that, I think it would be fair to say at the moment that the government has actually put forward some concepts that it wishes to explore with local councils as to the future management of these assets. The notion is the potential of the formation of between, I think, 1 and 17 asset owning entities, which beyond that as to how they'll be funded, whether they'll rate, the nature of the planning and so on, is all yet to be worked out. We've heard this morning from one of the advisors who have actually been involved in this process that this is a long-term change. Somewhere between 5 and 10 years, I think, was what was reported this morning. So the answer is, will we be involved in this process? I think the answer to that end is most definitely yes. Of course, we will be engaged in working with central government to explore the options for Rotorua and the advantages of any scheme that arises as a result of those discussions. We will be doing that. But that doesn't, in the short and medium term, excuse us from actually having an obligation to do everything that we can to ensure that our current and future maintenance and management of this asset class is the best that it can be, and that we are managing all of the risks associated with it. And that's the nature of the proposal that is in front of you today. It's that view to say, here is an action which we are proposing, which is prudent and appropriate to deal with the situation that is in front of us today. And at the same time, we will be engaged in the central government discussion as to what an alternative future may be. But that is by far at the moment certain.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
A point of order. Can I ask the Chief Executive to clarify his statement, how long the process is going to take?
No.
From this reform pathway, it ends 30th June 2023.
Thank you. It's not a point of order. It is a question. And no, I've said that would be, we have had an explanation, and that is it in terms of the three waters. Thank you. I've had quite a number of people who still wish to speak. Councillor Donaldson, then Councillor Bentley. Thank you, and a few others as well.
Madam Chair, I don't have any questions. I'm happy to move recommendation 2 and speak to it, but I don't have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Bentley. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you could give us a bit of a breakdown, Stavros, on Trility's involvement with Mangawhai and how long they've been involved and how much longer they're going to be involved.
Do you consider that question relevant to this, to the discussions?
Oh, but I think that Ahmad gave the answer. They're not. They bought the company,
Thank you.
that was involved, and the contract terminated last year.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Stavros. There was quite a plethora of talent and an array of army of skills that you brought this morning. But my question, keep it brief. I believe the devil is in the detail in terms of risk, and I fully agree with fellow councillor. I think Sandra Kaifong, I think lack of economy to scale, as you've highlighted over the years, as far as water has been concerned, has been a serious issue. Because some of the questions have already been asked, I think the question for me now remains is that I hope from Trility is the lessons of accountability is to be held before we sort of move forward, because water is very sacred. I mean, as an Indian, water is part of our culture. Was that it's not a commodity. It's more than commodity. It's a way of our life. It's what we wake up to. It's what we pray with, and it's what we offer. So I think this is a very sensitive issue, and because we can't discuss the three waters, I think we should tread very carefully in terms of this contract.
Thank you. Please just
I give you assurance that as we managed a plethora of other contracts out there, this is also going to be managed with the utmost diligence and scrutiny that is required both as public servants but also as professional engineers.
Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more, Councillor Kumar, that that water is actually precious to everyone. It is, and we can see how concerned the citizens of Auckland are now in terms of water continuity, etc. So we're all concerned with that. Councillor Maxwell, then Councillor Councillor Tatzel.
Yeah, thank you too, and I totally agree with what you've just said. And that's why I was so pleased, Stavros, that Te Arawa were involved right from the beginning. Stavros, you give me a lot of confidence that you're on top of this. This morning at the workshop, we were told about the tenders, and I'm sure it'll be of interest to our public that are now able to listen. And can you just briefly go through it again? There were 6 tenders, and then it reduced to 2 down to 1. The process. Thank you.
Councillor Maxwell, I think just to repeat, we started with 36 interested parties. That reduced to 6 consortia. 6 consortia was reduced to 3 consortia. 3 reduced to 2, and 1 came to a preferred one in November 18. Sorry.
Thank you. We seem to be merging into our discussion from questions. So thank you, and just please remember that. So thank you. Councillor Tatzel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Stavros. I know this has been a very long journey, and it's certainly something that myself and I think other councillors have struggled with at sometimes because of the uncomfortableness that comes from uncertainty. But I did like today, and also reading the report, the assurance that this has been peer reviewed by our external experts from legal, engineering, accounting, and even the Auditor General. So we do know it's been a robust process. But it's about communicating that to our public as well. The first question I had was, will the final contract be brought to council before we make that final decision? And I asked that because while we have had a really good presentation today, at the end of the day, I think that uncomfortableness will be resolved by being able to look at that contract as decision makers and know that, yes, we saw the contract that we were signing and we were comfortable with it. And the second question that I had, and I can't speak on behalf of Te Tata or Te Arawa, but I just want to ensure that iwi engagement is included and protected, because as council, under the Local Government Act, we are required to abide by the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi and promote opportunities for Māori to contribute to the decision-making process. So while council has a relationship with Te Tata or Te Arawa, can we ensure that this new form with Trility will also, although not legally obligated, but in some way be obligated to respect iwi engagement and those principles of the treaty? And I think that it's important that we make sure that that's still in there as a founding document of our country. So those are my 2 questions for you today.
Thank you, Councillor Tatzel. I think the second question, the contract document itself articulates the expectations of us as a principle that the MOU between Trility and Te Arawa will be given effect, along the lines of principles you just described. And I think, as you heard, Te Tarawa and Arapeta and other people were involved into that. They seem to be comfortable with the direction, the intent, of that relationship, which is also a contractual expectation, for us. It's embedded into the contract. First question, I'm not entirely sure how to address it because we don't normally bring a contract document for councillors to read. We've been discussing. I'm not entirely sure how to address when you say to see the contracts. Do you want to see Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 16? There are quite a number of schedules and what we call general conditions and special conditions. It's not a practice of the councillors to read the contract documents themselves, but if you want to go an executive summary of that, that's fine. I want some clarity about it, if you don't mind.
So can I just say that we don't usually bring detailed contracts to the table.
No.
That is something for our general manager and the CEO. That's your job.
Yep.
Thank you. So did you have another question, Councillor Tatzel? Thank you. Councillor Wang.
Kia ora, Madam Chair, thank you. And thank you, Stavros, and thank you for the team today this morning with the presentations. This is just a short and simple question. We all know that the current wastewater network, 67% of it is classified as poor and very poor condition. With Trility, I understand that the goal is to renew 1.5% of the network annually.
that is a council's infrastructure strategy and LTP investment profile, 1.5% of the value of the asset.
Okay.
But, where it's going to go, it just will be dedicated to the critical parts of the network to start with for the next 10 years, stabilize that and move to the less critical part of the networks.
Yeah, and so kind of my second question was kind of around that. How does that compare to the way that we're doing things now? And with Trility in 10 years' time, how do we see the makeup of the condition of our network?
Thank you, Councillor Wong. As I said, the core intention of our risk management strategy for wastewater network is to recognize that we've got the critical components of rising mains, pump stations, and plants, and so on. And I would expect the condition of these assets to being draw back into better condition from 67% to close to 50% in the next 10 years' time. The investment profile of 1.5% is based on the infrastructure strategy you have agreed in 2018, and probably will be the same for the next infrastructure strategy going forward. And that is, based on the depreciated value of the whole network of about 73 years. That's on average life cycle of the network. However, we do have a historical legacy where, as I said earlier this morning, for as far as I can see back, I cannot see where the council spend more than 0.5% on renewals on this network. Therefore, we do have a legacy, but we cannot allow that legacy to determine everything. Therefore, we will focus attention on the critical components, which probably will comprise about 40% of the network, and gradually stabilize that and then move to the next part of the network.
Thank you. We do have a mover and a seconder for the motion, but so we are moving into any other areas of discussion that people would like to move. And Dave, I will give you the final 5 minutes as you are the mover of the motion. Thank you. Mr. Thomas. Sorry?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wasn't aware someone had seconded it, so I would have seconded it if that hadn't happened. Look, I did just want to speak briefly to this and just say that I am in support.
Sorry, can I just say Dave should have had the first 5 minutes. Yes, I beg your pardon. Sorry.
Okay.
First 10 minutes, actually, Dave. Thank you. Yep. But you certainly don't have to take 10.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try not to. So look, I had the benefit and the duty to sit through both sessions of public feedback, and I fully understand that people came along there ready to, I guess, fire some bullets at this proposal, because there's a saying out there, death by consultation or consultation fatigue. And when we go back to 2015, we were in consultation over the Te Aroha Partnership and a whole range of lots of significant issues. And so for someone to retain all of that in the community, even councillors and elected members, those like Trevor and myself who were here, way back to the GFC, when there was historical underinvestment in our asset renewal, and the term sweating the assets was out there, with the resulting legacy problems that we face today. There's a lot to get your head around in this organisation, and so I fully understand that people came along, but there were some things said that can't be left unchallenged, and one was said by at the second lot of public feedback by a member of the public who said, Trility, Kaipara, I'll leave it at that, and left the room. Now, we know the history of Kaipara and the Mangawhai sewerage scheme, and it's been touched on again in question time today. There is no stigma associated to Trility from that, and we heard that this morning. It was great to have that reinforced by the commercial lawyer with 40 years experience and local government expertise who said they got a glowing reference from Kaipara District Council regarding Trility's management of the Mangawhai scheme for the last 10 years. I was also a bit concerned through the Q&A about the state of our network and the LTP consultation took me back to that, the mention today that this started during LTP consultation. Mr. Dunn and myself were down at the lakefront during LTP consultation at the container when there was a large sewage overflow, and it got quite unpleasant to hang out there for our assigned time, but there was a big spill picked up there. And so some of those shocking images that we saw of other infrastructure around the country has been replicated with our own wastewater infrastructure. And so it is essential that we put on a sound footing with renewal of the asset by an experienced provider. One of the other issues that was raised, and it was good to hear the toing and froing about what the contract binds the two parties to during discussions. And so we've heard what the consortium is putting in and how they're bound by the contract, but also the contract binds council to invest in asset renewal. And as I touched on earlier, that did not happen, deliberately so. Trevor and I were part of a council that held rates below 1% and consciously decided to sweat the assets. And you know, I'm sure it happened before at that time as well. And then you get the example of what happened at the lakefront and what's happened in other places. And the point was made by a chartered accountant who was sitting in the feedback session, who said actually what the contract does is it forces council to do its job. It forces council to invest in asset renewal. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Environmental sustainability, it can't be traded off for cheap fixes and sweating the assets any longer. And so we have to make a commitment, and this contract, in my view, is a commitment to reinvest, starting with the critical risk aspects of the wastewater asset, and to put us on a sound footing at the end of 10 years to have a much better level of infrastructure. And pretty much I think that sums up my thoughts on it. I fully support the proposal and the proposed consortium contract. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll see if there's any right of reply to be had.
Thank you, and I'm happy to take some discussion on that now, and I will, Mr. Thomas, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And look, I totally support what Councillor Donaldson has just said. I am in support of this proposal. A couple of things that came to me from going to the public sessions was one of the items that came up from that I heard was a concern about the loss of council ability to manage the contract. And I just want to say that I consider myself lucky to have worked closely with the infrastructure team for the last 7 years on various sewerage projects. And I'm very confident that they have the skill sets not only to execute their jobs in terms of their professional capacity, but also their skills, their ability to not only listen to communities, but interact with them and to value the feedback they get and to act on that to try and meet community needs. And I've seen that repeated over and over in the last number of years. So I have absolute faith that they will continue to have that ability. Another thing that has come up through my work with the sewage schemes is that I've had the opportunity to engage with the TRILITY staff that are employed at the Rotorua wastewater treatment plant. And once again, I've got to say it's been really impressive interaction with them. One person who has come over from Australia and just cannot stop singing the praises of Rotorua, loves it here, doesn't want to go back. It's his biggest fear that he'll get rotated out of Rotorua. The other person was a local person here who has moved into the job with TRILITY, and once again the TRILITY team at the plant presented a fantastic front to our communities when they went through the plant earlier this year, and I had nothing but praise for them from the community. When we started this process, I was a little uncertain, especially around the costings and the difference in cost, and I've been absolutely convinced by the discussions and the arguments that have been put up by Stavros and his team that this is incredibly good value for us. It's not too good to be true, it is just really good value. And I think finally the thing that really sways it for me is, as Dave said, this forces us to invest in our infrastructure for the next 10 years. It takes it out of the hands of a council that might want to retrench, might want to reduce rates and reduce expenditure, and it ensures that we will replace this infrastructure, which is an absolutely vital thing for us to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Very good points. Yes, Your Worship.
Certainly speaking in support of this, and I think it takes us back to your opening conversation this morning, Stavros, where you said we must address the problem, and the time to address the problem is now. Not to feel uncertain about any government change. We can be sure there's going to be a heightened bar of regulatory reform in the water space, and that's clear to us here. I am incredibly impressed at the consortia that you brought before us this morning, that showed the strength that I don't think we'd felt before, actually, of those that have worked with you, Deloitte's, TRILITY, Fulton Hogan, Morrison Lowe, the whole team that came this morning was incredibly impressive. And what I clearly see is that this isn't about contracting out, it's about bringing the best international experience in to Rotorua to work with us on our water network. And that's something that I don't think I'd felt before today. I'm totally confident with the expertise that was there legally, looking at the robustness of the contract. I think there were some good points raised by fellow councillors about the rigour that we need to be assured to have the confidence about the level of investment. And I just want to finish by also saying, seeing the staff here this morning beside you, your team, Stavros, and also seeing the partners that you brought today of Te Arawa was very moving to us, because we have said in our weighting of contracts we want to see local, we want to see future opportunities for our people. We want to see them seeing that if you come to Rotorua, you can live here, you can have a great career, and that is what you're offering us with this contract that we're considering today. I think it's incredibly innovative. I can see already that other councils will be saying, how did you get this far down the track over the last 3 years? And instead of waiting for a top-down approach about how could we join up, and I'm confident that this can be scaled up too, to include other regions, and I'm sure they'll love the innovation too. I'm just most relieved that this addresses the problem. We cannot prevaricate and muck around while waiting for indications of any government about where they're going. Our infrastructure network is in a state that must be invested in, must be maintained, and the terms of the contract, as Councillor Donaldson said, about ensuring that we do invest as we had already all supported in our 30-year infrastructure plan, is such a positive initiative. I'm glad it's come today. I'm glad we followed the special consultative procedure. To me, it showed that the community's only concerned about bits of it. And if we then go out, once this goes through council, and hold workshops about what this is going to look like and what it will deliver, our community will be confident, yet again, You proved to us when you went through street lighting, through all of the other previous contracts that we've had since you came, Stavros, that the sky hasn't fallen in, and service delivery for our people and our community has continued. So in terms of your stewardship, I want to congratulate you. You're not often told that publicly. I think being an infrastructure lead is one of the most challenging in council, but well done with your stewardships, and well done for holding to the values in your team and your organisation about what we can deliver when we do it in an innovative and collaborative way. I certainly support this.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Kai Fong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For me, this has been quite a difficult decision. I've attended all of the workshops, the public meetings. I've listened with an open mind to the submissions. I've made time to speak to Stavros alone to try and get more understanding of this decision. And can I firstly say that I really respect the professional way in which you've approached this, Stavros, and none of my comments are intended to impugn upon the integrity of yourself as a professional, your team, or any of the other experts. This is simply how I feel about this. I thought that it was fantastic that we had the workshop this morning with the array of professionals that were here. I just felt that it was a bit unfortunate that the timing of that workshop could not have been at a different time to allow us more time for consideration, deliberation, and asking of questions. And that's just because that's the way I operate. And I felt that the public would have greatly benefited from the opportunity to have heard from those experts as well. Unfortunately for me, what happened from this morning is that it's actually raised more questions for me that I want to investigate further. And I know I'm not going to talk about Mangawhai, but the Office of the Auditor General did make some conclusions out of that, which said that as public officials, we should not be scared to keep on asking questions until we have the information and that we are satisfied in ourselves that we can make a confident decision. And unfortunately for me, I still want to keep on asking questions. And as I said before, it's not casting aspersions on yourself or your team about the information that's been provided. It's just simply the way in which I am processing this information. The proposal rightly identifies the benefits to the community in terms of the professional expertise that it brings to the wastewater management, the economies of scale, the transfer of some of the risks, and the procurement opportunities. But what it also has done has identified a number of risks, and I'm not, in myself, satisfied that the answer or the mitigation or alleviation of those risks is satisfactory. Those points related to the wastewater treatment plant discharge, which is, I know, a matter that is into the future, but that is still a matter for consideration where we don't know whether discharging into the forest or into the lake is going to be a problem in the future. I'm not delving into the financial implications, but we are asking our ratepayers to pay an additional sum to accept this contract so that we transfer some of the risk of shock events. But transferring risk is not risk-free, and that was the purpose of my asking the questions around the contract, around what the potential costs could be in terms of breaches, termination, novation, and any other areas of risk that we haven't already thought about. We have been quite clear about keeping things local, and in particular post-COVID, keeping it local has been a really strong key point. I'm aware that TRILITY New Zealand Limited is a company that was only incorporated on the New Zealand Companies Office Register in February of this year. It is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Beijing Enterprises Water Company Limited. That is a Hong Kong-based company. The local applies only so long as TRILITY agrees to contract or subcontract with Fulton and Hogan as its subcontractors. The performance guarantee bond is to be provided by an offshore company. And having done litigation before, there may be, if we get into a dispute, a problem where we're trying to instigate a payment of a performance bond if litigation ensues. The question of track record, I know that that was discussed this morning with Trility and the fact that they operate a number of plants in Australia, but their presence in New Zealand is not well documented. In fact, there are no other facilities where they are operating this type of contract, and in fact, most of the operations in Australia are not of this particular wastewater management maintenance contract. We also, I just want to get around the issue that is it a risk that we are a test site where we are working in a different situation for Trility with the geothermal and the cultural overlay.
Can I just say that when we have discussions, you have 5 minutes, and I apologise if I didn't make you aware of that. So you're
okay. Well, if I can wrap up now,
Thank you.
in terms of post-COVID, I think that this is a real opportunity for us as the council to reset, to look at how we succession plan, how we could look at ourselves as a governance body about setting the renewals and how we are going to govern. So from my perspective, I'm saying I want to keep on asking questions. I have to have the courage of my convictions, to have the confidence to believe in the decision that I am making, and I don't have that today. It's not a situation where I'm impugning your integrity, Stavros, or those of the professionals. It is simply that for myself, I want to be confident in the decision. I know that we're not doing anything where it says we are going to continue investing in our infrastructure, but for me, is option 2 still a possible option? Thank you.
Thank you. And please just remember that when we're in this wrapping up period, it is 5 minutes, especially after we've had the mover and the second to speak, it is 5 minutes time allocation only. Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't take my 5 minutes, but Stavros, thank you for this morning's submission. I thought that it was a very, very efficient and slick operation, so congratulations on that. Certainly gave me more information, and while I'm thanking people, I'd like to thank Sandra for your very brief, I thought, comments a few minutes ago that I totally concur with what you're saying and have the same reservations and the same reasons for them, but we'll have to wait and see as to how things go in the future. The only unfortunate thing I think we missed out on, which we could have done a little bit of good kudos for this council, was that I feel we could have extended an invitation to the submitters of the long-term plan this morning, and given them an opportunity to hear exactly what we heard.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wouldn't it be nice if we can keep a balance sheet and transfer some of our speaking rights to some others that have a lot to say? Thank you very much, Stavros, once again. Not challenging anyone's impunity or disrespectful to anybody. I think this morning's presentation was very excellent and very professional. But like I said earlier, you know, the devil is in the detail in terms of risk, and we do know we have to upgrade. I suddenly feel that because we've got such a short space of time, and even though we did have submissions for public, and by no means some of the people that came and submitted, their impunity too, because they can't come and defend themselves, should not be challenged, because there were lots of very intelligent people. They made some points that, and even though my mind was very clear and neutral, they gave me an insight as to what I wouldn't have thought. Because from the council's perspective, just this morning, as professional as it was, it seems like it's just a hard sell to take this option. So, unfortunately, like I said, not being disrespectful, and I did mention earlier that there's lessons of accountability, and it didn't tell me that there is anything about reporting requirements of financial and standards, and also that did we not have faith that the government can put good, knowledgeable entities for us in the future? So at this stage, I'm sorry, I will not support this.
Thank you, Councillor Kumar. Councillor Maxwell, then Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. Having sat through many sessions for a long, long time in that now, I'm supporting the recommendation that's up there, and I've already asked some of the questions and some of the things I wanted to touch on, but in speaking to the motion itself, in attending some of the evenings that we had here, I went away from the last one just sort of because I guess it was the nature of the people that were there. They were commenting about Trility being a Chinese company. Oh, so what? You know, waste management, we heard they have Chinese company, but to me, fine. And a couple of the ones who had a go at me and said, yes, yeah, Chinese company, they were pharmacists. I didn't say anything, but I could have said, well, Fonterra does very well up in China. They do very well and good on them. But no, for me, I think that I have confidence in what Stavros has presented to us, and also there was a good call to bring the people here this morning to make that a very good, outstanding presentation this morning. Strongly support. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Colleagues, I really cannot support this proposal for a number of reasons. At the outset, the statement of proposal made it very clear that we had 7 major problems to our 3 water systems as systems: ageing infrastructure, growth and demand, compliance challenges, effects of climate change, funding and financing, internal capability, and regulating the quality of services. We've had a major shift in the policy context, which today was, on the advice of one of our most respected officials, we set aside. I think that was unwise. Secondly, I am concerned about the need for profit to be leaving, to be part of the arrangements when they may not be necessary given the nature of the 3 Waters program proposals. And why have that profit leaving the economy at such a difficult time? I do appreciate all the work that was done on organisation development as part of the argument today. That was much appreciated. And but I still remain concerned that a 5-year profit to be paid in the event of the contract being cancelled by the council gives an unwarranted level of risk to ratepayers. Finally, when I look hard at the actual statement of proposal, I do not see how it's going to directly influence or improve the 7 major problems we have. It's been stressed by many here. One of our key problems is to do with underinvestment in the past, and I accept that argument. I think that's well-founded. But it will not, that proposal before us will not source the capital need to upgrade freshwater, stormwater and the wastewater systems. And it does insist on retaining ownership when that is one of the key considerations which will have to be on the table if we engage in the 3 Waters reform program. So, in sum, I think that this policy debate we've had, extremely valuable, superb presentations, has been unnecessarily constrained and unwisely constrained. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to say a few words now as well. It was really very interesting when this morning in our workshop we saw some of those before and after pictures. And you know, that's the legacy issues that we're confronted with. Over 30 years or so, we heard this morning. And of course, keeping the rates low, something was going to give. And what gave was the underinvestment in our infrastructure. And so it's caught up with us. It has clearly caught up with us. So what will be our legacy in 20 to 25 years? What do we hand down to our mokopuna? What are we going to be burdening them with? This, yes, we will sign off on this today. It'll be yes or no. But this is where fearless leadership comes in. This is where visionary leadership comes in. And this is actually, Mayor Steve, with you and our CEO, everything that we saw up there on the before and after pictures has happened since 2013. Because before, we didn't have the visionary leadership that could have taken us far. I do want to thank you, Stavros, this morning for your presentation and for the workshop. I've heard people say we should have had it beforehand. It wasn't a presentation by the people, the manuhiri that you brought in. They merely said to us their involvement with you over a number of years. And I do not want to have, every time we have a significant decision to be made, to have people coming in like that. That is what you're paid for. That is your job. And that is our chief executive's job. That is your job to make that. And then you do the hard yards and bring us the recommendations and also the supporting information so that we can make that the decisions that we have to make today. But I do want to thank you because we all had an opportunity to hear from them for a brief period of time. There is no attempt ever, I don't believe, and certainly not, I hope, in my, for the standing committee that I chair, to silence any questions. I mean, they have to be relevant, of course. And Councillor Kaifong, you have said that you didn't have sufficient time, perhaps, or you want to be free to ask questions. Everyone is free to ask questions. Everyone is free. But I do appreciate that there are some new councillors that actually have to understand the pace at which we operate. We've got everything, we've got a number of things out for consultation right now. And so it's our job to ask questions, and I guess, of course, if you need to take some of those questions offline outside of the committee and speak to the CEO or to the General Manager, we can do that. But that's the nature of the business that we are in today. Everybody brings a range of skills to the table, and at the end of the day, the democratic process will actually say whether we have been successful in the recommendation being approved or not approved. So I don't want to say anything more other than to say thank you for the range of views and discussions we have had, and I will leave the final word to the mover of the submission. Thank you, of the recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just quickly touching on some of the, in response to some of the points raised. The submitters being here today, look, it's not just those submitters who came and spoke in person. Written submissions have equal standing, and I read them all, including the Lake Rotorua Community Association, fully supportive. And this morning goes up on the website, I think that's fantastic. The element of profit leaving the ratepayer out of the targeted rate. Well, Stavros made the absolute valid point that 90% of the management of the wastewater infrastructure currently is contracted out, and there is already an element of profit there. China ownership was touched on again. I'll come back to that if I've got time. Councillor Kaifong, I tautoko your comments regarding the Auditor General's report, which I've also read in respect of the Mangawhai scheme. That was a failure of governance, failure to ask the questions. Good on you for asking the questions. It's not done and dusted here today. This is a recommendation to Council. There's still time to ask questions. But in the Auditor General's report, and also in the tender documents of the day when that scheme was built and put together, there's no mention of TRILITY by the Auditor General or by, they weren't one of the original tenders to build the scheme. They went in, bought out, after the cost had blown out, bought out the operator, cleaned it up and operated it successfully for 10 years. The wastewater discharge point is irrelevant. That's another matter that'll be a separate contract. The point was made this morning quite clearly that in respect of the government's Three Waters initiative, this contract puts us in a stronger position in respect of getting involved with that. Finally, the China ownership thing. I mean, this has been the bogeyman that's been raised all along. I was brought up in the 50s and 60s, son of a prisoner of war.
from the Second World War, and the last thing, and he was a former motor mechanic, the last thing he would ever own was a VW, a German-built car, let alone a Jap car. He just did not have one. And there were all those attitudes towards anything other than British manufacturer back in the day. Then we had VWs being assembled in New Zealand, and so it goes on. I just think this is a red herring. This whole idea of the headquarters of Trility being funded from Hong Kong. It's an Australian registered company, and they're going to set up a company here in New Zealand. I think we've got no concerns in that regard. So those are my final comments, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donaldson. Well, it has been moved by Councillor Donaldson, second by Her Worship, and I am going to now put that recommendation that the committee recommends to Council that it agree to entering into a 10-year contract with Trilogy New Zealand Limited for the delivery of Rotorua wastewater services. I will now put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Thank you. So, thank you. Call for division. So, thank you. Just raise your hands, please.
Sorry.
For those for against, if you can just raise your hands, please. Thank you. Thank you. The motion is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. We do have only...
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Point of order.
Yes.
Before. I abstained.
Oh, you abstained.
Yes,
Thank you.
sorry.
Please make sure that you do...
I did.
Oh, you didn't? I
He
didn't?
did. It's just that you asked.
You heard it from here. Sorry. Well, then do make sure you catch the attention of the chair. Thank you for mentioning that. So sorry. Can we just have that again so we're clear on what we've got? One abstination. I've got. No, they didn't actually. Just for, yes, thank you. Thank you very much. No, we don't have another vote. The vote has been taken. Thank you, Council. Thank you. Thank you. Now, the only matter for the public excluded is to adopt the confidential minutes of the previous meeting. So I don't believe we should go into confidential for that. So it's just the confidential meetings. You're happy to vote. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. That the confidential minutes.
Sorry, I wasn't here.
Oh, sorry. I saw you. Thank you, Councillor Fisher. Councillor Wang. That the confidential minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 9th of July 2020 be confirmed as a true and correct record. We have a mover and a second. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you very much. I will declare the meeting closed and thank you all for your participation today. Kia ora. Thank you.
My message, have the courage of your convictions. Yes. Either yes or no.